My son looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're too old to babysit." No hesitation. No smile. Just those exact words. Then, as if to soften the blow, he laughed. That kind of laugh that doesn't invite you to laugh with him, but laughs at the very thought of you offering something sincere. Like I'd asked to run a marathon or join the circus. I stood there in his kitchen, still holding the glass of water he'd handed me like a visitor, not a mother. I said nothing. I just nodded. That night, when the house was quiet and the lights were off, I went into my room and pulled open the drawer beside my bed. It had been years since I'd touched that envelope. The paper inside had softened with time, but the numbers never changed. I sat down, stared at that old ticket, and for the first time in a long while, I smiled. Not because of the money, but because I already knew I would never sit in that house again. Not to wait, not to watch, not to be looked at like a cracked clock on the wall. Thank you for being here with me tonight. I don't take your time lightly, and I know stories like mine aren't always easy to sit through. They touch places most people don't like to visit. But sometimes, the quiet stories, the ones no one claps for, are the ones we need the most. So while you're here, tell me something. Where are you listening from? Maybe you're in your kitchen like I was that evening, staring out a window with too many thoughts and not enough answers. Or maybe you're lying awake, heart too full to rest, wondering when exactly you stopped being seen. If you've ever been told you were too much, or not enough, or just gently pushed out of the picture without a single loud word, then this story might feel a little familiar. Not every ending has to be loud to be powerful. And if this story stirs something in you, something you've kept quiet about for far too long, don't let it stay buried. You can share it below, or write it out and send it to the email down there. I read every word that comes through. Not because I'm nosy, but because pain is easier to carry when someone else nods and says, "Yes, I've felt that too." You don't need to shout your truth. You just need to let it breathe. I didn't grow up expecting the world to hand me comfort. I learned early on that if something was going to be done, I had to do it myself. When his father left, I didn't cry for long. I tightened my apron, rolled up my sleeves, and worked wherever I could. Early mornings in a bakery, late evenings cleaning offices. My feet ached most nights, but my heart stayed strong, because every tired step meant he had what he needed. I remember staying up past midnight sewing patches on his little jeans, just to make sure he looked proud walking into school. I didn't want him to feel poor, even when we had nothing but grit and prayer holding us together. I skipped meals so he could have two. Sold my wedding ring to pay for his summer camp, the one he loved. And when he got sick that winter in second grade, I sat up all night on the couch holding a cold rag to his forehead and whispering, "You're safe, you're okay," over and over like a lullaby. He used to call me his safe place, and he meant it. I was the place where scraped knees were cleaned, forgotten homework was saved, and bedtime fears disappeared. But years do something to memory, especially when comfort becomes regular and love becomes assumed. His voice changed. His hugs grew shorter. He started looking past me at the dinner table instead of toward me. Then she came along, and I saw it all start to slip. His new wife never said anything cruel outright. No sharp words, just small looks, closed-door conversations, and the feeling that my presence was an inconvenience. I'd cook meals, and they'd say, "Oh, we already ate." I'd offer help, and they'd politely decline. Eventually, they stopped asking if I'd join them, and just assumed I'd stay home. I remember standing in their entryway once, waiting with a gift in my hand, while they hurried past me with their coats on, smiling like I wasn't part of the plan. I started feeling like a guest in a life I had built with my own two hands. Like the walls I stayed up painting, the furniture I helped them move, and the advice I gave when they called crying. All of it was just a whisper they were trying to forget. It's strange how the people who once needed you most suddenly act like you're in the way, as if love has an expiration date. And I began to wonder, when exactly did I stop being seen as a mother and start being treated like a memory they were trying not to remember? It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those days where the sun peeks through the blinds just enough to warm the floor, and everything feels still for a moment. I had come over with a casserole dish wrapped in a towel, still hot, still smelling like the home I once had. I didn't call first, but I didn't think I needed to. I'd always just shown up, like I used to when he was little, and forgot his lunch, or when he needed someone to sit with him after a hard day. That kind of mothering doesn't come with appointments. I stepped inside, and they were there, rushing around the living room, picking up toys, getting ready for something. She looked surprised to see me, not unkind, just surprised. He said hi, gave me a quick hug, and asked what I was doing here. I told them I thought I'd stop by, see how they were holding up, maybe give them a break. I smiled and said, if you ever need help watching them, I'd love to lend a hand. I've still got a little energy left in these bones. And that's when he laughed. Not the warm kind, not the kind that brings people closer. It was sharp, short, and it cut through the room like glass underfoot. He didn't even realize how loud it felt. You'd slow them down, Mom, he said, grinning like it was some harmless joke. And she joined in, not laughing but tilting her head just enough to finish the dismissal. It's not really safe at your age. I stood there, still holding the towel-wrapped dish in my hands, feeling the heat slip out of it. I smiled. Of course I did. That's what you do when you're trying not to make a scene, when your pride gets bruised and you're standing on someone else's welcome mat. But inside, something shifted. My hands were trembling, not from age, but from holding in everything I wanted to say. That I had raised him alone, protected him through storms, taught him to walk, and now suddenly, I wasn't safe. That the woman who once juggled work and worry and wiped away every trace of his sadness wasn't fit to rock her own legacy to sleep. But I said nothing. I just nodded, said I understood, and placed the casserole on the counter like it was the only thing I had come for. And as they turned back to their plans, I stood there quietly, letting their laughter echo in my ears. In that moment, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel angry. I just felt finished. Like a page in a book that no longer belonged in the story. Something in me settled, not in bitterness, not in rage, but in a strange, clear kind of peace. I had given enough, and for the first time in years, I realized I didn't owe them anything else. After that day, something in the air between us changed. Not loud or sudden, but quiet like the way autumn slips into winter, one chilled breeze at a time. They didn't say I wasn't welcome. No, that would have been too direct. Instead, invitations just stopped. First it was a missed call, then a forgotten message, then silence that stretched for weeks without a word. Birthdays came and went, and where there used to be pictures sent to my phone, faces covered in cake, small hands holding up crayon drawings, there was nothing. I'd sit at the kitchen table in the evening, waiting for a buzz that never came, telling myself they were just busy, that life had gotten in the way. But I knew better. I wasn't being remembered. I was being managed. Like a delicate vase on a crowded shelf, too fragile to use, too inconvenient to throw away. I'd offer to visit, and they'd say it wasn't a good weekend. I'd suggest dinner, and there would always be a conflict. It's a strange thing, realizing you're no longer part of someone's daily rhythm. That your place has been quietly folded, stacked, and shelved away. I began setting the table for one without noticing. My second coffee mug stayed clean in the cupboard, and I started taking long walks in the evenings, not to clear my head, but to fill the silence in my home. One night, it was raining. Not heavy, but soft and steady, the kind of rain that blurs the windows and makes the world feel far away. I sat alone in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, holding a warm cup of tea between both hands. The house was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the old wall clock, and I let myself remember, really remember. The birthday cakes I stayed up late to bake, the school concerts I ran from work to catch, the way his small hand used to grip mine without thinking. I wondered if he remembered too. Or if the version of me he saw now, the gray-haired, slower-moving woman who offered to help, had replaced every memory of the woman who once carried him through the hardest years of his life. And then, as I stared out into the rain, I thought about the drawer, the one in my room I hadn't opened in years. It came to me like a whisper. Not loud or urgent, but sure. The lottery ticket. The one I'd bought all those years ago, not expecting a thing, just on a whim, just to feel something hopeful in my pocket. I hadn't told anyone about it. I tucked it away and forgot it for a while. But now, sitting there in the quiet, no longer needed, no longer invited, I remembered. And this time I didn't smile out of nostalgia. I smiled because I understood something clearly. I might not have a place at their table anymore, but that didn't mean I didn't have options. I wasn't finished. I wasn't invisible. I was simply waiting. It had been tucked away so long, I almost forgot where I'd put it. But my hands knew. They always remembered the things my heart wasn't ready to let go of. I walked into my room slowly, like I was stepping into something sacred, something I had protected without realizing it. I opened the drawer, reached beneath the old letters and dried lavender, and there it was, folded neatly inside the back cover of his father's Bible. A little slip of paper, faded at the corners, the ink still holding strong. I remember the day I bought it. I was standing in line at the grocery store, tired after a double shift, not expecting anything but a loaf of bread and some quiet. But something made me grab a ticket. Not hope, not desperation, just something. I scratched it with a house key on the bus ride home. I didn't scream, I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, staring at the numbers, at the tiny words that read jackpot, and I felt this strange, peaceful hum inside me. I tucked it away that night thinking maybe one day I'd use it. But not then. I had what I needed. I had him. I had purpose. I was still being called, still being needed, still being loved, even if it was sometimes tired and unspoken. But now was different. I unfolded the ticket, looked at it under the warm light of my bedside lamp, and I felt no fear, no hesitation. I knew exactly what I was going to do. The next morning I put on my best coat, the one I hadn't worn in years, and walked to the corner store with quiet steps. I handed the ticket to a clerk who barely looked up, until the screen in front of him blinked and his mouth opened slightly. He looked at me like I was someone he couldn't quite believe, like I'd just handed him a secret the world had forgotten. I just nodded, took my things, and walked out. No one stopped me. No one knew what I was carrying in that envelope. By sunset, I was back home, sitting at my kitchen table with papers spread out, reading about places I used to dream of, but never had time to visit. I didn't look at cruises or group tours or little weekend retreats. I looked at homes. Real homes. The kind with balconies that caught the morning light, with windows that opened to cobblestone streets, with kitchens where I could finally cook in peace without wondering who would show up or who wouldn't. I called a number I hadn't dialed in years. Marco, a friend of my husband's, someone who always said if you ever want to disappear, I've got a place with your name on it. And this time, I took him up on it. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't leave a trail. I didn't even write a goodbye. I just booked a private flight, packed the things that mattered, letters, photographs, recipes, and left everything else behind. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but because I finally saw the door, and this time, I chose to walk through it. One-way ticket, no return. A quiet goodbye to the version of myself they thought would sit still forever. A gentle hello to the life I was no longer too old to live. I remember Marco from a different life, the kind that sits in your memory, like sunlight behind a curtain. Always there, always warm, even if you can't see it. He was one of my husband's closest friends, back when laughter filled our little home more often than silence. They served together in the military, two boys who became men with sand in their boots and secrets in their eyes. Marco was kind. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke, who noticed the little things, like whether your tea had enough sugar or if your hands were cold when you didn't say a word. After my husband passed, we kept in touch for a while. Birthdays, Christmas cards, a few long-distance calls that stretched across time zones and grief, but mostly it was postcards. Simple ones, with pictures of sun-washed balconies, stone alleyways, and vineyards that seemed to stretch forever. He always wrote short notes, never dramatic, just a few words scrawled in his slanted handwriting. One of them stuck with me. It came years ago, after he'd moved to Italy for good. The photo on the front showed a hillside villa overlooking the sea, and on the back, he'd written, "If you ever want to disappear, I have a view with your name on it." At the time, I smiled and tucked it away in the drawer with all the others, not because I planned to go, but because it felt good to be remembered, to be offered a place, even if it was just a sentence on a postcard. But that night, after cashing the ticket and standing in a life that no longer asked me to stay, I pulled that old postcard out and stared at it like a map. I picked up the phone, hand steady, heart strangely calm, and I dialed the number. It rang twice. Then his voice came through, slightly older, rougher, but still full of warmth. I said, "Marco, it's me." There was a pause, then laughter, the kind that wraps around you like a sweater. He said, "I was wondering when you'd call." I didn't have to explain. I didn't need to give details. He didn't ask what I was leaving behind. He just said, "I'll clear the guest room, and I'll make sure there's espresso waiting on the balcony." I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief, not excitement. Just the quiet comfort of being wanted, without having to prove your worth. He sent me the address, the flight details, and told me the keys would be under the third flower pot beside the door. It was that simple. And in that one conversation, I remembered what it felt like to be seen again, not as an obligation or a burden, but as a person with a story still unfolding. I ended the call, sat in the stillness, and for the first time in years, I felt the wind change, not around me, but inside. Not because someone begged me to stay, but because someone else, somewhere across the ocean, had already made space for me to arrive. I didn't make any grand announcements. I didn't slam doors or raise my voice or send dramatic farewell letters. That's not how I move. That's not how I've ever moved. I just got quiet. And when you've given people your whole heart for so long, silence is the loudest thing you can offer. No one noticed when I stopped answering calls, and not because they were worried or too busy, but because those calls had already become fewer and shorter. I used to get updates, pictures, questions. Then it became last-minute messages and brief check-ins, like I was a task to be ticked off, not a person to be spoken to. So when I stopped responding, it didn't ring alarm bells. It just slipped into the rhythm they'd already built, one that didn't include me. I started packing one room at a time. I moved slowly, thoughtfully, not with sadness, but with clarity. I wrapped up photo frames and folded linens that had once held stories, not because I needed to take them, but because it felt like honoring a life that had already been let go. I gave away the dresses I hadn't worn in years, the china they never wanted, the books I used to read aloud on rainy afternoons. I labeled boxes with soft words like donation and recycle, and as I carried them out to the porch, no one stopped me. No one asked where the big mirror went, or why the old record player disappeared, or where the family portraits from the hallway had gone. They didn't notice that the chair by the window, the one I always sat in, was gone, or that the extra key I used to keep under the mat wasn't there anymore. It was almost poetic, how easy it was to vanish from a place that had already forgotten me. On my last evening there, I stood in the kitchen and watched the sun spill across the floor like it always had. I ran my hand along the counter one final time, not with regret, but with gratitude. That house had carried so many versions of me: wife, mother, nurse, protector, peacemaker. And now it would carry someone else's story. I took my house key and placed it gently on the mantel, right beside a framed picture of the three of us from years ago, back when smiles were real and arms knew where to wrap themselves without hesitation. I didn't take the picture with me. Some memories are better left behind. I walked out without a single suitcase. Just a travel bag, my documents, and a heart no longer begging for room. I didn't look back. Not because I was angry, but because I knew the road ahead deserved both my eyes. And as I closed the door behind me, I whispered to myself, not goodbye, not farewell. Just a quiet promise that the strength they thought had dried up was the very thing now carrying me forward. Weeks passed and silence bloomed in every corner of the life I left behind. The phone in my old kitchen rang, but no one answered, because I no longer lived between those walls. Emails were sent. Texts were typed, but they went unanswered, not because I was trying to hurt anyone, but because I was no longer the version of myself that stayed ready to rescue people who had already walked away. Then came the panic. His mortgage had fallen behind. The house, the very same one where I once braided hair, cooked meals, and was told I was too old to be of use, was now at risk. And she had left him. Packed up the car, took the silence she used to offer me, and turned it on him. Life has a way of folding back onto itself. The very things you dismiss have a habit of becoming the things you miss. I didn't hear about any of it from him directly. I wasn't there to pick up the pieces, to offer comfort or advice or money like I had in the past. This time, he called a number he didn't recognize. My lawyer's number. He must have gotten it from one of the papers I'd signed and left behind. Maybe he thought he could still reach me. Maybe he assumed I'd answer like I always did. But I had chosen something different. I had chosen peace. My lawyer told me what happened afterward, in that brief, uncomfortable phone call. He said my son sounded desperate, out of breath, confused. He asked where I was, said he needed to speak with me urgently. The line was quiet for a moment, and then calm as ever, my lawyer said, "She's not available. She's sailing off the coast of Italy." Those were his exact words. No explanation, no apology, just the truth. I wasn't sitting by the phone anymore. I wasn't pacing the floor wondering why I hadn't been invited. I wasn't waiting to be useful, to be forgiven, or to be seen. I was gone. Across the ocean, under the sun, beside a window with breeze and salt air and peace so thick you could taste it. I didn't know how he reacted. I didn't ask. Some things don't need follow-up. Because absence, when it's deliberate, speaks louder than any confrontation. And in that silence, he finally heard what my words had never been allowed to say, that you could only ignore someone for so long before they stop knocking. I wasn't punishing him. I wasn't being cruel. I had simply stepped out of the role he expected me to stay in forever. The seat at his table was empty, but this time it was by my own choosing. The first morning I woke up in Italy, I didn't feel like a woman who had escaped something. I felt like a woman who had finally arrived. The windows were open, the breeze carried the scent of bread from a nearby cafe, and the sunlight came in soft, like it was trying not to startle me. I sat up in bed slowly, not because I was sore or tired, but because I could. I wasn't rushing to meet anyone's schedule. I wasn't on call for someone else's needs. The house was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that felt like freedom, not loneliness. I made myself tea in a small blue kitchen with hand-painted tiles and no memories built into the walls. Just space. Space for something new. One of the first things I did was change my last name. Not out of spite, not to erase anything, but to reclaim the part of me that had always belonged only to me. I took back the name I was born with, the one I hadn't spoken aloud in decades. It felt strange at first, like trying on a coat that had been hidden at the back of the closet. But once it was on, it fit better than I remembered. It felt right, like I was reintroducing myself to the world on my own terms. I told Marco, and he smiled when he heard it, said it suited me better than the old one ever did. He was right. Each day I built something. Not with bricks or boards, but with habits. I started taking morning walks by the sea, long and slow, without a destination. Just letting my feet decide where peace would lead me. I'd stop and talk to local vendors, learn a few new words in their language, pick out fresh herbs and fruit with no recipe in mind. Just curiosity. I started baking again, not because someone asked for a cake, but because I missed the smell of cinnamon rising from the oven, missed the feel of dough in my hands, missed the small joy of pulling something warm and whole out into the open. I found a recipe in an old notebook I'd packed at the last minute and made it one afternoon. Sat on the balcony with a slice and a cup of coffee, and for the first time in years, I laughed. Not the polite kind you give when someone's watching, not the rehearsed kind you give when you want to keep peace, but the deep kind. The kind that starts in your chest and rolls out easy. The kind you don't have to share with anyone to feel it matter. I began painting again, something I hadn't done since before he was born. I'd forgotten how steady a brush can feel in your hand, how colors can say things your mouth doesn't know how to. I painted the sea, the buildings, the way the light hit the stone walls in the late afternoon. I didn't paint people. I wasn't ready to paint people. But I painted what peace looked like. And that was enough. I planted flowers in the little courtyard behind the house, sat under olive trees with a book, and let the days pass without feeling guilty for not being needed. No one knocked to ask for help, no one called only when things got hard, and no one looked at me with eyes that weighed my worth in usefulness. I was just a woman with a story, choosing to write the next chapter somewhere quiet. They said I was too old to babysit, like age was a sentence, like time was a wall I couldn't climb. But the truth is, I wasn't too old to begin again. I wasn't too old to find joy, to find stillness, to find myself. I was just too old to keep waiting for permission. And once I realized that, The world opened up like a window that had been stuck shut for years. And I stepped through it, not as someone who had been cast aside, but as someone who had finally remembered she was never meant to stay small. One quiet afternoon, I was sitting at the small wooden table near the open window, the sun settling on my shoulders like an old friend, when I heard the soft chime of my tablet. I had just come in from the garden, hands still slightly damp from watering the basil, the air inside warm and still smelling faintly of lemon and rosemary. I wasn't expecting anything. Most days, the messages I got were from neighbors, small local markets, the occasional update from Marco's niece who liked to send me snapshots of her cat in ridiculous hats. But that day it was different. His name appeared on the screen. It sat there in plain letters, simple and unshaking. For a moment I didn't touch it. I stared at it like it might vanish if I blinked. But it didn't. It waited, like a pebble in your shoe you finally decide to feel. I opened it, and all it said were 3 words, no punctuation, no explanation, just "I'm so sorry." I sat still, letting those words settle into the room like dust you'd tried not to notice. I imagined him writing them, maybe in the kitchen we used to share meals in, maybe in an office chair surrounded by bills and regrets. I pictured him staring at the screen, hovering over the send button, maybe thinking of everything that came before it, or maybe thinking only of himself. I didn't know, and truthfully, I didn't need to. There were so many things he could have said. So many memories he could have acknowledged. So many years he could have unfolded with his apology. But he didn't. He chose those 3 words. And maybe that was all he had. Or maybe that was all he thought I deserved. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted him to wonder, but because sometimes silence is the only response that feels honest. There are moments in life when the need to explain disappears, when the old ache stops asking to be heard. And this was one of those moments. I didn't need to unpack everything he didn't say. I didn't need to pour out my hurt into a screen. I had already done the work, the hard, silent work of healing. Of walking away not just from a place, but from a version of myself that had waited too long for someone else to value her. After I read it, I closed the tablet and returned to the sink to finish rinsing the herbs. Outside, the wind had picked up just enough to rustle the olive trees, and I stood there, looking out the window at the life I had made with my own hands. A life full of stillness and strength, not in spite of the pain, but because I had chosen not to let it root itself any deeper. Some chapters don't need epilogues. They don't need a final conversation or a proper goodbye. Some endings are simply a door quietly closed behind you, and the peace that follows when you don't turn back. If you've ever been told you were too old, not in harsh words, but in the quiet dismissals, the forgotten invitations, the sideways glances that say more than any sentence ever could, then you already know how that silence can echo louder than any insult. If you've ever sat at a table and felt invisible, or offered your help only to be told, with a forced smile, that it's no longer needed, then you felt what I felt. If someone once made you believe your best years were behind you, that your hands were no longer steady enough, your mind no longer sharp enough, your love no longer necessary, then please take this moment and let me say something to you that I had to travel across an ocean to fully believe. There is no deadline on worth. There is no age limit on being seen, being wanted, being useful in your own way. And there is no expiration date on freedom. People love to put others in boxes, especially as we get older. They decide for you what you can still do, what you should stop doing, and when it's time to sit down quietly and wait. Wait for what? I don't know. But I do know that sitting still isn't the same as being at peace. I was never afraid of growing older. What I feared was growing invisible. Being talked around instead of to. Being remembered for who I was, but not looked at for who I still am. But I don't fear that anymore. Not here. Not in this life I chose. Not in this little corner of the world where I decide when the day begins and how it ends. There's power in beginning again, especially when no one expects you to. There's power in packing your own bags, in walking away not in anger but in clarity. In saying to the world, not with shouting, but with steady breath, I am still here. And I decide what I do with the time I have left. Maybe your beginning won't look like mine. Maybe it's not a ticket to another country. Maybe it's a garden you finally plant, or a class you decide to take, or a letter you write to yourself reminding you of who you used to be before everyone started telling you who you should be. Whatever it is, start it. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait to be invited. Invite yourself. Make room for your own voice, your own joy, your own peace. Because peace doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in little pieces, in a breath you don't have to hold, in a room that feels like yours again, in a morning where you open your eyes and don't dread what's ahead. And once you taste it, truly taste it, you'll wonder how you ever went so long without it. So if someone made you feel small, if someone handed you the weight of their silence and told you to carry it, I'm here to tell you, you don't have to. You never did. You are not too late. You are not too tired. You are not too old. You are just right on time to begin again. They laughed like I had nothing left to offer, like my time had come and gone, like I should be grateful just to sit quietly and not ask for more. But what they forgot is simple. I kept the blueprint. I built the house, brick by brick, memory by memory, sacrifice by sacrifice. I was there from the beginning, laying foundations no one else could see. And when they told me I wasn't needed anymore, when they looked past me like I had faded into the background, I didn't argue. I just went and built something new. Not for applause, not for recognition, but for me. If someone ever tried to erase you, to write you out of the life you helped shape, to shrink your story down to a supporting role in a script you once carried, then this story, it belongs to you too. Comment below if they ever made you feel small in a place you helped build. Share your story, even if it trembles. And if you've ever had to choose peace over proving a point, if you've ever walked away instead of begging to stay, then subscribe. You are not alone, you are not forgotten, and you are far from finished. Thank you for watching. See you on the next video.